So the session 8 was supposed to continue, but unfortunately some interruption happened and therefore the recording had to stop. So what I've done here is to create an epilogue for the 8 sessions that we've had, which starts off from where we left and then we will continue to the conclusion. So what we learned so far at the end of session 8 was the five structure, the five topics under Tattva Bodha. The first one being Sadhana Chatushtayam, which tells you the four necessary qualifications for you to learn Jnana Yoga. Then we went into detail about Vyasti Vicharaha, which is the understanding of the individual, the analysis of the individual. From there, we went to Samasti Vicharaha, which basically explains the cosmos or analyzes how the cosmos came into existence. And then from there, we went to the most important lesson of Tattva Bodha, which is the Jiva Paramatma Aikyam, which is Jivatma Paramatma being the same, or Aikya Vicharaha. And then we learned about the fruit of knowing this knowledge, which is Jnana Phalam. What the five topics that we've covered so far gives us is a very strong foundation with clear understanding of the various terminology, which helps us to pursue further subjects in in Vedanta. Like if you pick up Bhagavad Gita, you will have a much better understanding of Bhagavad Gita because of this foundation. Hopefully, it will lead you to more such topics and learnings. As a continuation of this, what I wanted to also demonstrate this by sharing with you some few quotations from few of the Upanishads and see that, how it makes sense to you having known all of this, right? So let's start with the first one, which is Chandogya Upanishad. Chandogya Upanishad starts with Shvataketu asking his father Uttalaka about wisdom. He says, what is wisdom? Uttalaka says, as by knowing one lump of clay, dear one, we come to know all things made out of clay, that they differ only in name and form, while the stuff of which are all made is clay. So this is essentially what we talked about when we talked about the table and the wood, and the names and forms are nama rupa, right? And he goes on to talk about things made of gold, things made of iron, etc. And so through that spiritual wisdom, dear one, we come to know that all life is one. In the beginning was the being, one without a second. Out of himself he brought forth the cosmos and entered into everything in it. There is nothing that does not come from him. Of everything, he is the inmost self. He is the truth. He is the supreme self. You are that, Shvataketu. You are that, or Tattvamasi. We learned about this. So having that foundation, when you read this, it becomes very clear to you what we're talking about. Second, I want to give an example from Mandukya Upanishad, which is, as you can read, I'll read it out and it'll be very obvious to you what the meaning is. The effulgent self who is beyond thought shines in the greatest, shines in the smallest, shines in the farthest, shines in the nearest, shines in the secret chamber of hearts. The flowing river is lost in the sea. The illumined sage is lost in the self. The flowing river has become the sea. The illumined sage has become the self. The universe comes forth from the Brahman and will return to the Brahman. Verily, all is Brahman. So this is, typically like the wave example that we took, where the wave seems like a separate thing, but it's nothing but water. Similarly, if you take a river, each river has its own identity, but it all goes into the ocean, and then you can't differentiate one from the other. So similarly, a illumined sage has become a self. The next example is from Katha Upanishad. Katha Upanishad is the story of Nachiketa. Nachiketa is a young boy whose father is doing a yajna. In that time period, there was a lot of rituals that people used to do. And this particular yajna was supposed to be where he gives all his material belongings away. So he starts donating his cows and whatever, and then Nachiketa kind of realizes that what his dad is doing is not very genuine, because he seems to only give away the cows that were old and dying and not very productive and so on and so forth, right? So Nachiketa gets a bit, he feels that his father is not doing the right thing. So he goes up to his father and he asks him a question. He says, Dad, I also belong to you. Since you're giving away all your belongings, you have to give me away too. Who are you going to give me away to? Nachiketa's dad gets very annoyed with him, but he pesters him. He keeps asking, who are you going to give me off to? And then in his anger, his father says, I'm going to give you to Yama. So Nachiketa takes it seriously and he finds his way to Yamaraj. He goes to Yama's palace. But Yama has gone out. He's out on his business, and so Nachiketa is sitting there, waiting for Yama to come. And Yama, the god of death, comes after 3 days, and he finds Nachiketa patiently waiting outside his house without any food, water, or anything. He's waited for 3 days. So Yama, in India, we believe that Atiti Devo Bhava. So you are a guest. You are my, you should be treated well. And I have made you starve for 3 days. So to compensate for it, I will give you 3 boons. Whatever you want, you can ask. So Nachiketa asks, first he asks that he should return to his dad and he should be welcomed by his dad with open arms, and that both of them should have a lot of peace. So it's a very smart way of saying, let me go back and let my father be happy with me. So that's what he asks for in the first wish. So Yama says, okay, granted, that will happen to you. Then the second wish, Nachiketa says, give me the secret of which is the most powerful yajna. And Yama teaches him that as well. And then he says, from now onwards, this will be called the Nachiketa yajna or whatever. Right? So he gets two. Then the third one, Nachiketa says, the third one I want, this is the one I want most, is I want to know what happens to people after they die. You are the you are the god of death, and you should be able to tell me this. So Yama says, no, I won't tell you this because even the devas don't know this. I don't want it to be told to anybody. But Nachiketa insists. Yama offers him other boons, beautiful life, richness, etc., etc. Nachiketa is still determined to know what happens to people when they die. This is kind of shows his desire to knowledge, right? Staunch desire. So Yama then says, okay, I will teach you. And then he talks to him about the Atma, the undying Atma, the eternal Atma, right? And he says, he brings in the simile of chariot. He says, Atma is like the passenger in a chariot. The chariot is your body. The horses that draw the chariot, the 5 horses are the 5 senses, and so on and so forth, right? And the driver is the mind and intellect. And that's how the body, that's how you should consider everything is outside of you, and you are the Atman. So that's when he quotes, above the senses it's the mind, above the mind is the intellect, above the intellect is the ego, and above the ego is the unmanifested cause, and beyond is Brahman, omnipresent, attributeless. Realizing him, one is released from the cycle of birth and death. So that's kind of Katha Upanishad. And Katha Upanishad is supposed to have, been very poetic. Unfortunately, I don't know Sanskrit, but if you are able to understand Sanskrit, it's supposed to be extremely poetic. And people like Emerson, the great poet, Somerset Maugham, who wrote The Razor's Edge, were all motivated by this Upanishad. Then this is an interesting quote I came along. I thought I will show this to you and ask you to guess who said this. It says, when you make two one, and when you make the inner as the outer, and the outer the inner, and above as the below, then you shall enter. I am the light that is above them all. I am the all. All came forth from me, all attained to me. Cleave a piece of wood, I am there. Lift up the stone, and you will find me. It's kind of, to me, it resonated of talking about Brahman. But actually, this is a quote from Jesus Christ, right? Jesus Christ has said this thing, and Going back to our discussion of the inner core of most religions are similar. This is an example I felt very strongly about. This is a poem again. If you read it, if it says, "If the red slayer think he slays, or if the slain think he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways. I keep and pass and turn again. Far or forgot to me is near. Shadow and sunlight are the same. The vanished gods to me appear, and one to me are shame and fame." This is actually taken from a poem called Brahma by Ralph Waldo Emerson. He spoke about Emerson in the Katha Upanishad. He wrote this in the 1800s. This is the first two stanzas, but the other two are in similar vein. Finally, I wanted to conclude with the timeline of the major schools of Vedanta. We saw some of the things in terms of the Upanishads. Let me go through this to show you the timeline and also highlight some of the philosophical thinking behind each of these schools of philosophy. So as you can see, the Vedas were written somewhere before 1500 BC. The Upanishads are supposed to have come into existence much after that, around the 800 BC. And 700 BC is the Samkhya school, founded by Kapila. Kapila basically was one of the first to say that there are only two things. One is matter and one is the spirit. So that's the first point where the multiplicity was reduced to the duality. Then in 600 BC, Brihaspati came with the Charvaka school, which is the school of materialism. Materialism meaning that he said there is, you don't worry about rebirth and spirit and stuff. Everything is matter. You die, you go back into matter, and then you're reborn. Matter creates some new stuff. So that was one end of the spectrum. Then in 560 BC, Buddhism came into existence. Buddha saw the suffering amongst people. He started inquiring, why is there suffering? And then he came up with a path to nirvana, which makes you free from the suffering. Then 450 BC, Brahma Sutra is supposed to have come. Brahma Sutra is pithy statements which summarizes in the shortest possible way the gems in the Upanishads and Vedas. So it was compiled by Badrayana, but what they say is, the writers of the sutras were so bent upon reducing the size of each sutra, each of those mantras, so that it can be as pithy as possible, right? So it's extremely difficult to understand. However, many philosophers who came after that have written long explanations for the things that occur in Brahma Sutra. Adi Shankara wrote Bhashyam on this as well. Then in 400 BC, Purva Mimamsa came, which is basically based on the Purva Veda, which is the first part of the Veda, which contains all the religious obligations, and it was very focused on the rituals. Jamini was the founder of this, and then you had Kumarila Bhatta and Mandana Mishra, with whom Adi Shankara had a debate, and finally he won, and Mandana Mishra became Adi Shankara's Sishya or disciple, right? Then came the Nyaya school and Vaiseshika school. These were focused on logic and logically derived. Vaiseshika were the first ones to talk about the atomistic ontology. That is, all things are made of one small thing and everything is built from there. Then in the 100 BC was when Bhagavad Gita was written. Bhagavad Gita was written as part of the Mahabharata, where Krishna advises Arjuna. Now, it is 18 chapters, and in fact, one of the Advaita philosophers of the later time, 1500s, Madhusudan Saraswati, has interpreted this in this way. He says the 18 chapters can be divided into three parts, which refer to Tattvamasi. That is, the first 6 chapters talk about Arjuna as an individual. Krishna then talks about Karma Yoga and Upasana Yoga and how you can become better as an individual. Then the next 6 chapters talks about God. Krishna talks about himself as God, but basically he's talking about Brahman, because he's supposed to have shown the Vishwarupa to Arjuna, which included everything that you can ever think of, which is nothing but the cosmos, right? He shows that Brahman is inclusive of everything. Everything is in Brahman. And then the last 6 chapters supposed to talk about the Aikyam, how the Jivatma and Paramatma are the same. So it is, in a sense, an interpretation. Again, Adi Shankara has written a full explanation of Bhagavad Gita from his perspective, and so did Ramanuja. So everyone has a take on it, but essentially it is a collection of all the thoughts that occur in the Upanishads. Uh, then Madhyamaka Buddhism came. Nagarjuna expanded upon Buddha's teachings, and he went on the philosophical side. And finally, he basically said, when you look at everything is an illusion, so ultimately existence is the absence of inherent existence, is what Nagarjuna proved. Then in the 200, 300 CE, Ashtanga Yoga came. Patanjali wrote Ashtanga Yoga, the Yoga Sutra. It is, we saw a little bit about this. This is basically a way of getting that insight into Brahman through hard practices of yoga. So this is somewhat like when we take the movie example, we are saying the movie, and we said the movie, the substratum of the movie is the screen, and you cannot see the screen. Ashtanga Yoga tries to say that you switch off the movie and you will be able to see the screen, right? On the other hand, Advaita says you can understand how things work and therefore see the screen. So it's different way approaches to the same thing. Then came the Samkhya Karikas, which was written by Ishwara Krishna, who took Samkhya philosophy and brought it, systematized it, and he called the spirit as Purusha and the matter as Prakriti. So the dualism was clearly defined. Then the 400 CE is when Yogachara Buddhism came, which is combination of yoga and Buddhism. And then Shankara was born in 788 CE, and he synthesized Advaita. And then, he had to really debate with both the Sunyavadis, which is the Buddhists, and the Purva Mimamsa, which is the highly dualistic form of things. What Adi Shankara was able to do is to synthesize many of these thoughts, bring all of the relevant portions of this into one structured way, which became Advaita. Now, Advaita was so convincing and so strong that everything else that came after that were kind of, against Advaita, or a different form of Advaita, or some qualification of Advaita. And that's what Ramanuja and Madhava came. And then Madhava went dualist again. Then came all the devotional schools, including Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in the 1300s, and many of those great philosophers who said devotion, surrender to God, will take you to knowledge, or rather moksha. So what I want to do last is to spend a little bit of time on Adi Shankara, because what we have spent in the last 8 weeks is learn about what his philosophy is. Adi Shankara was born in a village called Kaladi to his mother Aryamba and father Shivaguru. They were a very poor Brahmin family, and Adi Shankara learned the Vedas. By the age of 8, he had mastered the Vedas. Unfortunately, his father died when he was very young. So when he went to his mother and he said he wants to pursue knowledge and he wants to become a sannyasi, Aryamba didn't want to let Shankara go. The story goes that when once he was having a bath in the river, a crocodile caught his leg. And when his mother saw this, and Shankara said, "Listen, I'm going to die anyway. Just let me take sannyasa. At least I'll be happy when I die." So his mother gives him permission to take sannyasa. But the crocodile leaves his leg and he comes out and he takes on sannyasa. But at the same time, he promises his mother that even though he becomes a sannyasi, which means he's not supposed to be associated with any of the samsara or the duties of the grahastha, he will still come back when she dies and do her final rites, and he does actually. So he took sannyas, parted from his mother, and started searching for a guru, and he found a guru in Govindapada. Govindapada was a disciple of Gaudapada. Gaudapada is the one who had written a lot in the um, concept of Advaita philosophy to a large extent, interpreting the Upanishads, of course. Mandukya Karika is what he had written, and he, then Shankara codified Advaita philosophy. He walked up and down the whole of India twice in his short life of 32 years. And he debated with Sunyavadis and Purvamimamsa. I told you about that. He also established a number of mutts. The four mutts he established in the four corners of India are still functioning. There are many more mutts that he had established as well. And this is a scene from the debate that he had with Mandana Mishra. Again, it's a very interesting story. Shankara encountered Kumarila Bhatta, who was the Purva Mimamsa propagate. And when he talked to him, he said, I'm too old. He was about to die. And he said, why don't you go and debate with Mandana Mishra? So Shankara goes to Mandana Mishra and they start debating. And Shankara actually appoints Mandana Mishra's wife, Uday Bharti, as the judge. So he was so confident. And it also goes to show how erudite she was in terms of being the judge of these two. So they debate for a long time, and Mandana Mishra accepts defeat. But his wife says, no, you still have to win over me. And when she starts arguing, she says, okay, you know all of these, but you've never been a grahastha, so your knowledge is not complete. So Adi Shankara says, give me a few days and I will get this knowledge. So he goes to a cave, meditates, and actually his Sukshma Sharira is supposed to have left him and left his body and gone into a body of a prince who had just died. So then the prince wakes up from his deathbed, and Shankara enjoys Grahastha for a certain period of time, understands what Grahastha means, and then he comes back into his body and wins over her as well. So Mandana Mishra then becomes one of his disciples. Supposedly, then he was one of the heads of the four mats that he's called Sureshwaracharya. There are stories. We are not very clear that it's true or not, but basically he became a follower of Advaita. In fact, the civil arguments and debates that took place in those times is an example that we should follow today. Even Madhusudan Saraswati, whom I spoke about, he is supposed to have learned Nyaya philosophy. He wanted to become uh, a part of the dualist philosophy of bhakti, but he wanted to learn Advaita to oppose Advaita, right? And when he started learning, he was so convinced, and that shows the intellectual integrity of the people of those times, that he accepted Advaita, although he went to actually oppose it. He accepted Advaita and became one of the greatest Advaita philosophers of that time. So, there are many, many things that we can learn, and this is one of the things, how you can actually argue civilly and still get convinced about something, or accept defeat in a sane way instead of just trolling people. So that's really what I wanted to conclude. In conclusion, I wanted to also thank my gurus. I've been interested in philosophy and have been following many people. Out of the After all the people who I have listened to and read of, I will want to say thanks to Swami Paramatmananda, who is Dayananda's disciple, and Swami Sarvapriyananda, who's from the Ramakrishna Mission. Many of their talks are available on YouTube and on the internet. That's where most of my knowledge has come. Unfortunately, I don't know Sanskrit. and that's a regret that I have. And therefore, my knowledge is all secondary based on lectures and books that I've read in English or other languages. Uh, the lack of knowledge of Sanskrit also means that I have definitely mispronounced many, many words in this whole series. So I apologize to you, all of you, uh, and to my gurus especially. And my sincere thanks to all of you for attending each of these sessions and showing so much interest. I do hope that interest continues and we continue to engage on these topics. Thank you so much.